Hello and welcome to Higher Ed Live, the live weekly web show all about the world of higher education. I am your host, Seth Odell. We are live, as always, at Southern New Hampshire University in Manchester, New Hampshire. Thank you guys for joining us. We are the show that covers digital development, professional empowerment, and that last one, believe me, is going to be a big topic for discussion today. We have two guests coming on for a very big subject, all about all about professional development, higher education, all about managing your career, making things happen. Not all of it's going to be kind of hunky-dory. It's going to be a real serious conversation with some great advice from two very smart gentlemen. But before I bring on today's guests, allow me to very quickly thank the sponsors that help make this show possible. Integral is one of the sponsors of Higher Ed Live, the creators of the Schools app on Facebook. You can check out their webinar series about how private social networks can increase yield and retention. If you think social media is just for fun, download the latest research on social side of student retention. We just sent a link out to that just a second ago. We're also sponsored by Omni Update, the leading web content management system CMS provider for higher education. The company's web CMS OU campus, well, it's secure, it's scalable with great tools and features, deployment flexibility, and an awesome user community. In fact, it was the highest ranked CMS in the customer satisfaction survey from Media Guru. So if you need a CMS, do yourselves a favor and check out OmniUpdate.com. And finally, we are also sponsored by the wonderful team over at Scavenger, a Google-funded mobile game about going places, doing challenges, and earning points. If you think Scavenger is for orientation, think again, guys, because we have a great blog post we're sending out all about how LaRoche College used Scavenger to help recruit students, and the results were pretty impressive. So definitely check that out. Again, tweet going out right now. So thank you guys for joining the show. As I said, this is a big topic all about professional development. One little note, guys, no Weekly 5 this week. No unsolicited shout out. I know we're starting just a little bit late, so I want to dive right into the subject matter. So please, again, if you don't mind, be a little generous. Not only share your feedback with the hashtag HigherEdLive, but maybe let some folks know we're talking about this today too, because I know with a little bit of a late start, I don't want to miss anybody. This is not going to be the kind of show you're going to want to sit back on and miss. We want you guys talking. We're going to be showing your tweets on air. So without further ado, allow me to welcome today's guests. There are two of them. The first one who's up on screen is the one and only Ed Cabellon. Ed, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Seth. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
I'm really happy to have you here, but you are not the only guest today. We have another wise mind from the EDU who's been around for a while. So Mark Greenfield, welcome to the program as well.
Hi, Seth. Great to be back. Looking forward to this conversation.
I appreciate both of you guys being here. We are going to be having a big conversation all about managing your career in higher ed. What's the best way to not only get ahead, but make a difference, build that portfolio, do good work, and get rewarded for it? We have a bit of a talent issue in higher ed. You guys have seen it. We've covered it on shows before, shows like Bleeding Talent, where we talk about how a lot of folks are leaving the industry. We want to talk today about how you can stay in the industry, how you can make a difference, and you can get ahead. And the question is, how do you do that? So the state of the higher ed web professionals or higher professional in general is probably the best place to start looking at that. So we're going to dive in and talk about that today. So Mark, I'm going to toss to you first. You've been around the industry for the longest. I want to throw out a big question to you. I'll pass it to Ed afterwards. Talk to me about loyalty, because how is loyalty, do you think, in EDU in the 2000s versus maybe how it was a decade or two ago or even back before that?
Sure. I think what we're seeing in higher ed right now is reflected in all industries. This is actually a little bit of an interesting time for me because last week I celebrated my 25th anniversary working at the University of Buffalo. I don't know how many people in the next generation are going to be in the same job at the same institution 25 years down the road. It used to be, my parents' generation, when you got out of college or started a job, loyalty was a big thing, but that equation went both ways. A individual is loyal to the company. In return, they got pension, they got kind of job security, and the company had an employee they could depend on for their entire career. But what we've seen over the last decade or so is the idea that loyalty is now gone both ways. So companies are laying off people. In fact, I'm seeing in higher education, when you have tenured faculty being laid off, that really gets your attention. So I think that whole loyalty issue is something we need to think about. And I think there are different ways to remain loyal, but we need to rethink that whole process. One book I would like to recommend people take a look at is called Free Agent Nation. It's written by Dan Pink. I'll send out the link to that in a second. This was started as a Fast Company article back in 1997, and it's amazing how many people who work now are, quote, free agents, where they're working on their own by themselves. And I think this is going to be a trend we see in higher education going forward. The idea that you're not, you might be doing a lot more outsourcing. And I've been talking about that when I talk about higher ed getting flattened. And that's kind of what I'm talking about, where a lot of the work done within higher ed isn't necessarily going to be done by people working on that campus directly. So we'll see where that all goes.
Absolutely. And I got to say, I totally agree with the loyalty issue. I mean, I'm the son of a man who spent 32 years working for New York State, my father as well, who retired recently. And when I got hired at UCLA, I was a state employee, and both of my parents said, that's so great. I can't believe there's still a pension plan. And they really thought I was going to be there forever. And before I toss to Ed, let me say this. When I went to UCLA, I actually wasn't certain that I wouldn't be. It's not that my new generation, because I am a little bit younger, said I'm going to go in and hop around. I said I'll see. And obviously, as people know, I'm not there anymore. So there is a shift, because my folks thought, that's it, you're good. And I even thought, well, I can stay, and maybe I'll stay forever, maybe I won't. We'll talk about the reasons I left, the reasons you guys might be leaving to go different positions in a minute. But, Ed, let me bring you on as well. What are your thoughts on the modern loyalty? I mean, I think Mark brought up a good version that there is loyalty goes both ways, and also you could argue, loyalty to whom and for what. But how has your experience been? What are your thoughts on loyalty? I mean, we're not seeing people staying for the same, 25, 30 years. By the way, congratulations to Mark for that 25-year anniversary. That's quite a feat. Worth hats off. But what are your thoughts on loyalty?
Well, I really believe that today, I mean, as a card-carrying Generation X member, I think that a lot of people that I've seen have either stayed because of loyalty that the institution has showed to them in terms of professional development funds, in terms of opportunities within the institution or beyond, if that's, with an association or whatnot. But I think that loyalty now is really hard to come by. I mean, I've been in my current position for about 6 years now, and I enjoy it quite a bit, and I love it, and I don't see myself going anywhere else, because I think the institution has been great to me. And so when I see younger professionals, I know that may not be there. I don't hear them talking about, I hear a lot of the 2-year thing, or staying for 3 years and then moving on to something else. And so my parents were the same way. They worked at the same place for many years, and so loyalty for me is no longer one of those givens, where when I first started working, I assumed I was going to be at a place for 5 to 7 to maybe 10 years. And now that I've been in the field for about 15 years now, it's just not there, and it's disappointing. So I think we have to really instill loyalty in our own staff, if we have the staff that we get to manage, and give them reasons why they should be loyal to the organization.
Well, that brings up exactly what's going on Twitter right now. Since a lot of people talk about, that aren't seeing the loyalty going back. It's a lot easier to be loyal if you don't feel the need to be promoted, or the higher ed industry, sort of discourages loyalty. And that's really interesting. And I got to say, I totally understand where these folks are coming from. And I say that because let's go to the first conversation. I do think we're gonna have a lot of little bold moments at the show. The first bold moment I'll say is, as an industry, and again, guys, I'll say this: I absolutely am in love with my current employer. I know you two are. We're all happy to work. We're talking about an industry-wide trends here and stuff that we're approaching this issue with today. So casting a very wide umbrella and a wide net, I guess you could say. But the first one I would say is, I think it is more valuable in the eyes of an institution if you come from the outside. And that's when it comes from promotions. I found time and time again people that I do think are talented being passed by for an outside hire, or taking massive 6 figures to go to a vendor contract that something could be done internally if it was just given a little bit more funds. Is there a thought for either of you on how talent is valued? Do you guys think it's more valuable if you work outside an institution? And I bring this up because that's the issue of loyalty. If a promotion gets passed by to hire a total stranger, despite the fact that you've worked really hard your whole career, I will say there are times that I feel like I have seen that really valuable people haven't been sort of given back. And I would argue it's kind of goes up to maybe Mark's original point about getting reciprocated loyalty. It's not just about you have a safe job, but maybe it's about saying, if you work hard, do great work, we're going to find a way to help you grow a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, go ahead. No, go ahead, Mark. Go for it.
All right. So one of the interesting things for me is I remember having a conversation about 10 years ago with both the vice president and president at the University of Buffalo. And I was expressing some frustration about how my expertise wasn't necessarily valued on campus. And we were bringing in consultants that were very good consultants, but didn't know anything more about the subject than I did. And I was very frustrated about that. And, the sage advice from these two gentlemen who I consider mentors was, welcome to higher ed. That's just the way it is. And that's one of the reasons why I do consulting work, is now I'm on the other side of the table. And right or wrong, that just seems to be the culture of higher ed. And I think if you want to have your employees remain loyal, respect their expertise. understand that a lot of people in higher ed know what they're doing. And as I look at the kind of brain drain in higher ed, and I mentioned this on Twitter earlier today, I got an email from LinkedIn earlier this week that said 227 of my LinkedIn contacts changed their job in 2011. That's about a quarter of my contacts. That's a huge number to change jobs. Most of those people work in higher ed. And when I look at why they did that, now, so for some people, it's a money issue, but I think for more people, it's a respect issue, and it's a let me do my job issue. Let me kind of develop my skill set. And I see too many times in higher ed where that does not happen.
I think that's a really, really great point. The respect my skill set. That's a huge takeaway and a huge point as well. I definitely see that. Ed, what are your thoughts? I'm sure in your position at kind of overseeing staff and folks that you've seen people at your institution take a different position or leave as well. Just generally speaking, why is it that you think are some of the reasons behind folks that do decide to leave either higher ed or just their positions for another institution? I mean, I'm sure it's a myriad of factors, but is there anything that jumps out to you?
Yeah, I mean, being on the student affairs side of the higher ed coin, I could definitely say that a lot of the folks I come in contact with now are actually starting to outgrow their current positions, where I've seen people stay, and not because of loyalty, but because, A, the job market's so tough to find a new job to move up. I mean, there's only so much you can do in an entry-level higher ed administration position. After a few years of doing that entry-level work, if there's not a chance to move up, whether it's in title or responsibility, people either have to stay because they've got nowhere else to go, or there's nothing really out there that really gets them fired up. And so I've seen actually inside the last 5 years more people staying stationary, and not because it's by choice, it's because they've got nowhere else to go. And so there's a level of frustration I think some staff are going to start to, with the recession and with everything that happened, I think we did see, a less hiring happening within higher ed. But maybe we've turned a corner. Maybe after the State of Union address this week, maybe it is time to start really examining things and rethinking how we run institutions. And so that might be a level of opportunity. But I don't believe that nowadays it's that simple to just say move out or move on, because let's be honest, there's not a lot of work out there for folks. And if you've given your life to higher ed, graduate school, internships, assistantships, and now you want to jump ship and do something different, that's going to be really challenging.
And that's a really good point. And let's bring up the fact too that higher ed as an industry, we're talking about administration and staff, very, very wide set of skill sets. So when you're talking about someone like you, Ed, with your experience in student affairs, now that's a position where absolutely you're seeing folks that are realistically, you're pretty locked in. You've given a lot of your life, a lot of your wallet, I'm sure, unless you get scholarships, to go get that degree. You're committed. You've invested a lot of time. You're trying to work with students. But I'm going to do a little bit of a flip, and I'm going to throw something to Mark then, because Mark, I mean, it's a little different in the web world, because that's a world where your skills are directly applicable to almost any other industry, generally speaking. So it is true that Ed brings up a great point that we talk about, that managing your higher ed career, a lot of it is what are your external options. That's a really interesting thing to think about, because again, for web folks, also for marketing folks, PR folks, their skill sets are probably a lot easier to lift up, go to a private sector job or a corporation and drop that. That's a really interesting thing to think about.
Right. So here's my take on this. Over the last 10 years or so, I've had the opportunity to hire some very talented people. Every single one of them came from the private sector. Every one of them took a pay cut, some of them significant pay cuts. Okay. The reason they came and worked for me is, again, the idea of working at a higher ed institution where you can make a difference, but also the whole idea of job security. One of the guys who works for me worked in New York City during the dot-com boom in the 1990s, very talented, but it was, your companies are going out of business left and right, so he wanted some stability in his life. I think one of the big issues right now is that guarantee in higher ed isn't necessarily there anymore. I'm fascinated that there's 2 SUNY schools who are recruiting for a webmaster right now to be shared by 2 campuses, which is it's fascinating to me. And that kind of goes right into what I've been talking about, higher ed getting flattened. But the issue for me is that traditionally people in higher ed make a lot less money than people on the outside. And again, the people who work for me were comfortable with that because they had a stable job. They knew they were going to have this job. UB's not going out of business, so I have a guarantee of a job going forward. I'm concerned that guarantee is starting to go away, and that we're going to see people leaving because you can make a lot more money on the outside. Mm-hmm. And I think that's going to be a big issue for higher ed going forward is how do you compensate people, and will you be flexible enough to do some of those non-monetary things like flex time, telecommuting, those, professional development fits right into this. That's a big frustration I see out there is there's no money for professional development. So that's going to be a huge issue going forward is how do we fairly compensate people, especially in the kind of web piece of higher ed.
Absolutely. Now, there's a lot of great talk on the back channel, guys. First off, love the conversations today about why people work in higher ed specifically. Because when you have these conversations, there's something to bring up. First off, with we're talking about with Mark, people that can pick up and leave to go to industries where they make more money. Why wouldn't you go? Okay, right? And then for eds, why would people spend years of their lives dedicated to a job that they don't even yet have? They have this much of a passion for making a difference that they're saying, I'm going to focus my life in this direction to try and make a difference. And that's the beauty of education. And that's the first thing I want to say is that anyone who knows me knows I get fired up about education, especially when it comes to access and affordability, because education is the single most powerful tool for people to elevate themselves in their lives. And as administrators, even if we're not faculty, we have an opportunity to build an infrastructure to help support that. And that's really amazing. And again, so why, for instance, am I still in higher ed? I'm still in higher ed because I really, really give a shit. And I'm sure that's why you guys probably do too, right? I mean, I moved 3,000 miles away from a city I loved. I loved LA because I wanted to get involved on the ground floor of something where I think I could make a difference in helping make education more affordable, more accessible to the people that need it most. But here's the thing. I left UCLA to do that. Why? Because I have loyalty, but my loyalty is to my values first, to my employer second. And therefore, I was willing to switch my employer in order to not change my values. So that's just going to throw out there too. So I think it's very interesting. So guys, we've talked about leaving the industry. Ed, I want to bring you on and ask you a question. In student affairs, can people bounce from institution to institution? I mean, if they're in a place where they feel like I'm not getting ahead, maybe my boss isn't giving me the promotion, or I'm not getting that mentorship, because that's something, career mentorship, totally lacking in a lot of areas in our industry. If someone's stuck in student affairs specifically, can they move ahead? Can they jump, to a different college down the road? Is that kind of opportunity available in the student affairs realm?
Yeah, I think so. I think if you look at, and it's hard to say traditional in student affairs because there's so many roads to get into when you're working in student affairs. And so for me, when I think about opportunities for student affairs professionals to move up and by jumping from campus to campus, I think as long as your timing isn't like every year or every 6 months, you're just changing jobs because you're not giving it a chance, or you're not allowing yourself to grow in the position and be challenged or to challenge others. And so I think if folks are jumping because it's a progression, it's not just this, well, I'm bored, and I'm not getting what I want, so I'm going to find a new job. I mean, if you're able to do that, then tell me where these jobs are, because I think that's awesome. But certainly, I think most folks in student affairs, if they're moving, it's because it's a progression. As an administrator, you realize as you work closer with students, and as you get those opportunities to impact policy and have a seat at those upper level tables, then you want to take advantage of that, especially if you give a shit and you care and you want to do that, like you said. So certainly for me, it's more about, if someone's looking to move up in student affairs, it's because they have a progressive experience base. And they were willing to be challenged, and they were willing to do that. And they're in it, Seth, because they do give a shit. And student affairs professionals work with students day in and day out because they're at that level with students one-on-one every day, making sure that they feel like that they matter and that they are getting attention where they may not be getting it. And so it's a labor of love for student affairs folks. But there is opportunity. It's just, how do you play? I know we're going to talk about this later, but how do you play that role right? How do you play politics, and how do you do that so that you can move up in a way that's seen as progressive?
Yeah, I totally agree. I can't wait to get to that topic. And before we do, I want to throw one more thing at you, Mark, which is, what are your thoughts on people leaving higher ed and coming back? Because in the web professions we talked about, folks can leave. They can pick up a skill set and go to a private sector. I mean, do you see people making major career moves by leaving higher ed and then coming back several years later, perhaps several steps up the food chain higher than they would if they had just kind of stayed in place?
I definitely think that's a possibility. One of the things that is lacking in the web world is opportunity for advancement. A lot of people hit a ceiling pretty quickly, and they can't develop the skill set. So if you go out to if you leave higher ed and can develop those skills and bring them back to higher ed, I think that is definitely a career path that might work for some folks. The flip side of that, however, is really understanding the business of higher ed and what it's like to work at an institution. That's the one piece of advice I give everybody when they start working for me, is that you have to understand how higher education works. You need to understand the history of higher ed, why it exists, what the challenges are. I always tell the story that on my tax forms, I don't put a web developer in what my occupation is. I put higher education administrator. I read the Chronicle much more than I read any IT magazine or those kinds of things. So I think that's the biggest piece that's missing, is really understanding what higher ed is all about. And just real quick before I forget, going back to the idea of why I've stayed in higher ed for 25 years, and kudos to you for for kind of sharing this belief that what we do matters. And a lot of the presentations I give, I close with a speech from Christy McAuliffe, who was the high school teacher who died in the Challenger accident. And my favorite quote from her is, "I touch the future, I teach." And that's for me, I have that kind of up on my wall, reminding me of why, even though sometimes it can be frustrating, what we do does matter.
Absolutely. I absolutely couldn't agree more. As I love stuff like that. And guys, if you're watching and you're feeling the same way, why are you working in higher ed right now? I mean, besides the biweekly or even monthly paycheck, whatever it is, let us know. I want to hear from you guys too, what your values are and your reasoning, because a lot of people are saying here, it's valuable, it's important to me to be in this industry. Tell me more why, because I couldn't agree more. I absolutely love it. Now, that said, there's one other point talking about not just leaving institutions, but it's about jumping up within the institution itself. And that's a really interesting element too. I did that at UCLA. I worked within from one job to another. I felt a little bit stuck in one position. I was able to get into another. I know Kyle James is on the back channel right now. He jumped around to a bunch of different jobs. That's another way as well. Although I would say that's a really kind of, to me, felt like a slow climb up the ladder, and an opportunity to leave and make a bigger step, but still there. That said, I don't just want to talk about whether or not we should leave higher ed, because I hope everybody watching knows that this show is not about leaving. It's about staying and making a difference. So let me throw it out first to you, Ed. Let's talk about the next thing, though. So we're in this industry. It is a battle of inches, but we're an industry that can oftentimes be very political. How do you think, what's some basic advice to start with on handling the political side of a higher education career?
I got a few thoughts on that. So first, I think to any of the professionals out there, whether you're in student affairs or academic affairs or web or higher ed web, I mean, number one is get out of your office, man. I mean, get out from behind that cubicle or that office door and go to meetings and get involved and get your face seen on campus. Because I think part of being political on campus is being able to tell your story and being able to share your story with other people. Because if you're not telling your story, there's no guarantee that someone else is going to do it for you. I mean, my assumption is that, yeah, my VP and the folks above me are telling our story really well, and I know they do. But sometimes you have to be your own best advocate. And so get out, meet people and interact at university events and things that are just outside of the daily things that you may do, because it's important to show that face time. It's really important. The second is understanding who on campus you should know and developing relationships with those specific people. So as you get going on your first professional position, write a list down of people who you think you might want to meet and ask people, who do I need to meet on campus? How do I get things done around here? And making sure those relationships are built right from the get-go. And develop a reputation for yourself of someone who's A, prepared, and B, who gets things done. I mean, if you have that reputation on campus, then you're going to really go far, because people can count on you and believe in the word that you say. And so those are just a few thoughts, Seth, because I really think that playing politics is just more about understanding the landscape. It's actually being a part of the landscape and making sure that your face is part of that political landscape as well.
And I could not agree more. That's such a really good point, especially as it comes to relationship building. I will say a little bit of backstory just to show you guys. When I got into UCLA, I started pretty low on the totem pole, but I was doing a lot of web video back in 2007, at a time when it wasn't really happening much. But really what happened for me was, and it gave me a chance to get around campus and meet people, because I was doing videos with all sorts of different departments. And what led to my next job was the fact that another department stole me. And they literally used that word. We're going to steal you away. And it was because not only did they have the relationships, it's important to know people, but I had demonstrated good work. I had demonstrated that I could go into high stressful situations for them and deliver a really high quality product in a short amount of time. I demonstrated value through a relationship, even though it wasn't directly between me and my boss. And that ended up being really powerful. I think that's a really, really good point. So Mark, you've been in the industry, as we just said, 25 years. When do you play politics to get things done, and when do you put things aside to beef up your career? I mean, how do you balance doing the right thing between doing the smart thing and the safe thing? I can't imagine they're always going to be the same.
Right, and that's always a challenge, I think, in any job is, what your core values are and when politics get in the way of that. Unfortunately, politics in higher ed is probably a bigger issue than some other industries, and it's a huge challenge. But there are ways to understand. One of the best training opportunities I went through was a very intensive Stephen Covey training around the 7 habits of highly effective people. And one of my favorite habits is habit 5, which is seek first to understand, then to be understood. So when you get into those political situations, before you start stating your opinion, do everything in your power to truly understand the other person's position. One of the things I read when following Covey is the idea of a Native American talking stick. And the way that Native American tribal councils worked is that one person in the center of the council has a talking stick, and as long as they are in possession of that stick, nobody else is allowed to speak. They can ask a couple questions, but that person does not give up the floor until they are comfortable everybody understands their point of view. I have actually used a lacrosse stick as a Native American talking stick in some meetings when people had very differing opinions about things and try to get everybody on the same page. I think that politics are going to be something that, especially as you move up the food chain, that you're going to have to understand and learn how to work within those, work within politics. It's a skill that can be acquired, but at the end of the day, my advice to people is always stay true to your core principles, and that at the end of the day, that's what matters.
I cannot agree more. I think it's really, really great advice. In the political game, the thing I'll say too is definitely, have strong allies. Definitely pick your battles. There's times to, do as Carlin Borosiago is my boss here at SNSU knows. I always say, this is my line in the sand. But you got to pick those moments and say, when is this really going to be? Because the problem is if you're always shouting, no one's ever listening. And if you're barely ever raising that voice, and you do once in a while, people are going to understand. So I think it's definitely about dynamics too, so people understand, like, listen, I'm going to disagree with you, but this is how much I disagree. And then when I disagree this much, understand that too. It's kind of understanding, I don't know if it's the depth or the severity of the situation, but definitely knowing that everything's not going to be a war every single time. A general advice I would say too is ask questions. I've been so surprised when I've been put into rooms where I've been told, okay, this isn't going to work out, this person's really controversial, or they don't get along with people, and I start by asking about them. And it's very simple. It makes it human, and it's just saying, what are your goals? What are you working on? What are you trying to do with this position? Letting someone get that out first and making sure that they know that you understand what they're working for, I think definitely helps. So listen, guys, I want to take this a little bit step further because we talked about people leaving this industry, and I'm going to throw a very controversial one out there. Let's heat this up a little bit and say this, which is, I'll let either one of you guys start, but how do you get a raise in higher education? Because it's not all about money, especially if you look at the back channel. A lot of people talk about that. We're not here for that, but at the end of the day, we do got rent to pay. We'd like to take the kids to Disney maybe. It would be nice to have that wallet just a little bit thicker. How do you have that kind of uncomfortable conversation, especially in an industry where, as Mark says, we really feel like we're kind of, as a model, rolling backwards, maybe not exactly forwards?
Oof, that's a tough one, Seth. I guess I'll start. Getting a raise in higher ed is just one of those things where I know that we all believe that we deserve more money because, as Mark said, we definitely don't get paid, what I think industry folks who do similar work may be getting paid. But I think that at the end of the day, ask yourself, you're asking for a raise. Why are you asking for a raise? Is it because you've been there for a long time and now you're like, oh man, I could really use the extra dollars? And I mean, I'm part of a union, so I mean, it's very difficult for me to negotiate getting a raise if, unless I've done something unbelievable. And when you work in an institution where things might be a little challenging to get things done, or you may not have the resources to do the things you might have visions for, so you have to kind of work within the system. I sort of created my own raise, and that's by solving problems outside of the office where I could. If I was invited to come to campus to consult and speak, that was something that happened with me. And so I never waited for a raise on campus because I just know that my work should speak for itself. And if I get one, awesome, but to look for and expect it, I think your time should be spent making sure that you can solve your campus's problems and do the work for your students. And if you need the extra money, that's where you sort of have to. And that's why I think there's been a lot of entrepreneurial spirit within the higher ed community, with many folks in higher ed, not just the folks sitting around this webcast right now, but others who maybe doing things on the side because they have to, because they need that extra money. So when you ask a question about a raise, Seth, I'm thinking, I don't know, because that does tie back to politics, and then, who should get one too, and so it's dicey. But I think in what you can control, which is if you can go out and get another job or do something else to earn some extra money, doing that is one of those things where that's the road I went, and it may not be for everybody, but having a conversation with your boss about having a raise, make sure you have your ducks in a row and make sure that you can show proof that why your value has gone up and why your stock has gone up, because otherwise it's going to be a quick conversation.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree. Mark, any thoughts before I dive in?
Yeah, let me just my thoughts on this is that, when you're thinking about raises, there are two things. One, you have to be able to prove your value, and secondly, know your value. And I think that those are two key pieces. If you can't demonstrate the value you bring to the organization, they're not going to automatically understand that. So you really have to kind of, toot your own horn a little bit, share your expertise, share your experiences, and really be able to talk to them in a way that they can understand what the value is. I remember 7-8 years ago when we got away from printing our online class schedule and printing our undergraduate catalog. We automated all of that, made it web-based only, saved the institution 6 figures a year. There's some real value in that. So let's, provide appropriate compensation for the people who have the skill set to be able to do that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think your point's really, really well done as well. And I'm going to jump in too and just add something that Carlin talked about too in the back channel, which is very true, which is that one of the biggest challenges is, why are you asking for a raise? And is it because the person next to you makes more than you? And that's the first thing you got to do in any job ever, is understand that when you're offered a job and offered a certain amount of money, you're agreeing that you are valuing yourself and your efforts and your work at that amount. So you cannot, in any job, honestly, ever look around you and say someone else is getting paid too much or anything else. That's not the game you can play. Listen, you agreed to work a job for a certain amount of money. That's about between you and your employer. So deal with that. Don't get jealousy or anything else get in the game. A lot of people do that all the time. That being said, there are some things you can do. I want to run down a couple things as well. First thing, ask yourself, why are you really asking for a raise? Most of the time, I found people aren't actually asking for money. They're asking for growth potential and to be heard. Really ask yourself, is it the raise that I'm asking for, or is it maybe the position where I'm being looked at? So talk about that. I think the conversation of growth is a great place to start. Try to force that professional mentorship out of a supervisor, at least the best you can. Make sure they know the kind of things that you want to do. Ed brought up a great point about people doing freelance work as well. I'll say this, whether or not people agree with me or not, at the end of the day, I think most people do freelance not to get paid, but to get heard. People want to be in a position where another institution values your ideas enough to bring you in. That said, it also pays pretty well. So people, that doesn't hurt either. But the last thing I want to say is this, and this is the highly political thing. Depending on where you work, bring in another offer, but only if you're willing to walk away. I have seen that work many times, and the times it hasn't, you got to walk. But if you want to play that game, I'll be honest, at least at the institutions I've been at before, people played that game a lot, and it did kind of work for some people. But that, again, it gets dicey, and I don't know. I've never cared enough about the paycheck to risk that kind of stuff. I think it's about a lot more than that, and I'd hope it is for the folks watching as well. But I don't know. I think that the politics thing. I want to shift the conversation a little bit to one interesting thing. So Mark, I'm going to throw this out to you first. But let's talk about social media, because we're all out. We're talking about things. We're vocal. Social media, I think, can be incredibly beneficial for your career, but I also think it may reach a point where it hurts it. What can people do in the professional development sense to use social networking to kind of get their career moving in a direction maybe faster or in a better direction than it was beforehand? Is it valuable for them to utilize their voice in the public realm if it's not being heard internally at the institution?
Two thoughts on social media. One is the idea of brand you. You are a brand. You as an individual are a brand. So if you look at me, my brand is Mark GR. And I have intentionally tried to build that brand over time, both as something that will benefit me personally and hopefully benefit my institution as well. So I think we all need to think of ourselves as a company, as an entity that needs to brand itself, and social media provides a lot of opportunity to do that. The flip side of that is understanding reputation, your kind of reputation management, understanding that everything you're doing on social media, a potential employer is looking at. So you need to kind of understand that piece of it as well, knowing what your career aspirations are and making sure that your social media activities 25, right now aren't going to impact you 20 years down the road. I've had that conversation with some people who have applied for jobs right out of college, and I've gone onto their Facebook page, much to their surprise, or Googled them and found some stuff that they might not be comfortable with their employer knowing. And my message back to them, which is the same message I give to my undergraduate student bloggers, is think about 20 years from now when you want to apply for that senior level position and somebody's going back and looking at your Facebook timeline. Are you going to be comfortable with what they see there? So understanding, again, the idea of branding yourself, balancing that with reputation management is, social media is a great tool for really advancing your career that way.
Yeah, totally. So, Ed, what are your thoughts on this? And people being able to utilize these tools to build up reputation and maybe capitalize on it, either financially or a new job or more responsibility or any of those things?
Yeah, I mean, social media has been such a wonderful opportunity for colleagues of mine in higher ed to connect. I mean, I don't think I don't think I would have ever met you or any of these wonderful folks online had it not been for Twitter, joining it, 3 years ago. And so I think there is a place for social media in the workplace. I think there's a place for social media in crafting your brand and everything that Mark said. But I also caution in the idea of balance, because I think in a tech-heavy information age 2012, I think it's easy for a lot of us to get sucked in and realize, oh my God, I've been on Facebook for an hour, or I've been on Twitter for an hour, and I really need to get this stuff done. And that's been a struggle for me, just knowing over the last 3 years, managing not only a conversation, a campus conversation through social media, but my own conversations with other people. I go through times where I wonder, I haven't really been active on Twitter, and I have to be okay with that because I gotta get stuff done. And so I think there is a role for it. I think for those just discovering it, it's so exciting, and we've seen the balloon, the whole influx of new folks joining Twitter and joining Google Plus and joining Facebook and these conversations. But I think that if you're going to use it, be mindful of the balance that you need to have with it, and understand that if you're not going to say it, and if you're not willing to have that conversation in person, be mindful of what you put out there, because it's it will come back as you can take so many things out of context, and so a tweet can only say so much. And so it's important to understand that what role it plays for you. Is it professional development? Is it brand building? Is it because you're doing as part of a job? And whatever the case, whatever that mix may be, just understand when you put the hat on for the time you're using it, understand what it is, get in, get out, and move on, because you still are going to be judged by your productivity at work. And so it's important.
Well, listen, there's a great tweet that came in that I want to address right now, coming in saying, I'm afraid of seeming like I'm more interested in promoting myself than my present future employees with social media branding. This is a great point. I'm going to say one thing real quick. I'm going to sound off a little bit. I'm going to kind of open the hood a little bit in a way that I don't generally about my own personal situation. Just say this. I got involved in social media and got online 2007, 2008, 2009 heavily with blogging because I felt my voice wasn't heard and I felt my ideas were being utilized. And I said, how can I share these ideas? Both, I'll be honest, completely honest, let's be real here, for vindication and validation from the community that I didn't get internally. I looked for that. I'll admit that. There is always a bit of ego stroke, feeling like you're not alone, feeling like my ideas have some value, feeling validated. I got on for that. And I also got on saying, listen, if I don't feel that my institution is necessarily valuing all the great ideas I have, will other people value them, and then can I capitalize on those? And that gets into reputation management, I think. It gets into the idea of, are you looked at as being someone who has a level of intelligence that maybe exceeds your actual portfolio? And I use portfolio broadly, not talking about just a designer portfolio, but your resume. Can you demonstrate intelligence and skills beyond your resume so that other people can see them? Can you capitalize on those to get ahead? Now, here's the thing. I'm going to be very, very honest with you. I feel my last two job positions have largely come about, at least been supported by my own reputation with doing shows like this, showing people that I really, really care, that I'm willing to work 100 hours every week, doing ridiculous amounts of things because I have to. But guess what? Ed hit the nail on the head that at the end of the day, it's more about backing up your reputation than your reputation itself. And I feel that fear every single day in my job, that I don't ever want people to think that I'm not taking things seriously just because I go home and like to do things like Higher Ed Live, and I do like to still occasionally do freelance work because I like to do fun projects. I like to be involved in things. At the end of the day, I do have a fear every day that I'm going to be looked at as looking out for myself first. And that's something I feel like I've reached a point with social media that terrifies me a little bit. I think I'm concerned that people are going to look at me and think I'm just some, politician kind of person looking to build themselves up, and I don't ever want to utilize my institution and use them in that way. And I think thankfully in the institution I'm at now, they see that, they understand how connected I am to the values and the core of our mission. But that said, I think we're reaching a point, and I'm curious if I'm alone here, that I think I've built up a reputation with social media. I've been able to capitalize on that. I'm doing amazing work now. But now I just got to do great work. Like now now that I've gotten to myself to a point where that portfolio is sort of public and people are looking for it, that's what's going to get my next step in my career, which I hope is still here wherever it goes. It's going to be on the work I do now, not the talk I do now. And that's been a big lesson for me to learn, because I don't think that was the case. I think when social media came about, it was just about how much can I talk about, how can people hear me, can I present at conferences, and that's all great, but at the end of the day, what are you churning out? What are you making happen? If you can take reputation and put yourself in a job where you can make a difference, are you making a difference anymore, or are you still just talking? That's been a big fear of mine, something I think it's going to be the next step of career development in higher ed. It's going to be an interesting one.
Seth, can I comment on that for a second?
Please, jump in.
Yeah, there's a great post that was sent by my good friend Chris Conzen from Twitter, and he sent this post out, and it was from the Harvard Business Review. It was written by Oliver Segovia, I think his name is, and it's called "To Find Happiness, Forget About Passion." And when I first read the article, I thought, wait, I've been taught my whole life to follow my dreams, the things I care about, and follow passion. But the article talks about the fact that if you really want to find happiness in your career, in your life, you sort of have to find the intersection of solving a problem and what you're passionate about. So it's not just about finding your passion, because, I mean, I love tech. I mean, those who know me in higher ed know that I'm not in higher ed web, I'm not in higher ed marketing, but tech is something I've always been passionate about. And so I found a marriage in student affairs, and I think that's sort of why I've been able to, connect with so many different people, because I can understand sort of both sides of the tech and understand what the needs in the higher ed administration for student affairs is. And so for those out there who are really thinking about like trying to use social media to connect with people or to share your ideas and values, find something that addresses a problem. Find whatever it is that you really tugs at your heartstrings. And I'm going to tweet out the link in a second, but it's a great post. I think folks should read it and really take what they can get out of it. For me, it validated the fact that when I started my blog 3 years ago, I started because people were asking me the same questions over and over. Ed, how do you do this? Ed, how did you do that? Hey, how did you do that, by the way? And it got to the point where it was easier for me to blog about it and share that content with people on a blog, and then maybe have a follow-up conversation after, because my job and my family and things were going. And so I think if people really wanted to find happiness or their in their job specifically, I think it's identifying a problem that you can solve because of your own talent and passion level. I really got a lot of it. When you were talking, it made me think of that. So
yeah, well, the article's going out. I think it was Mike Petroff who sent that out. So it was a really great article. I'm excited to share that with everybody. It is, yeah, it's just really interesting. I think your points are really well taken. So, Mark, let me throw this to you, too. Then. I mean, what are your thoughts a little bit further on using social media? Because clearly, you're someone whose blog is very well followed. I think I don't know which came first, cart before horse, chicken or egg, as far as you speak at a lot of conferences. I mean, do you ever fear that, whether for you or for the industry as a whole, are we going to reach a point where people look at a big social media reputation and they think that you're more in it for you than for a future employer or future job growth? Or do you think it's that the people are going to be seeing, and by people I say like employers, going to be seeing value in that?
That's a very good question, and I think that you need to be able to explain to folks why, how your reputation helps the institution's reputation. And I think that's something a lot of people struggle with. I know that I've talked to a lot of my colleagues who are kind of maybe a year or two behind me and getting more active in presentations and being out there. And their concern is that it's almost looked at as being freelancing or moonlighting, and that it's being done for them and not for the institution. I think what's important is that as you're doing this kind of work, you're building your expertise. Through the power of social media, you are building expertise, sharing best practices. I like to say all the time that higher education colleges are very collegial. It's amazing that we can sit at a conference like High Ed Web with people who may be considered competitors, but we're sharing our secrets. We're sharing our best practices. And, again, that's one of the things I love about higher ed, is that there isn't that, intense sense of competition. But I think it's important to make sure that you're your institution values that kind of work and understands the value of that kind of work.
Yeah, and I could not agree more. And the last part's really one to hit it on the head is to have these conversations. Don't be afraid to bring them up and have these conversations and say these things. I'm speaking at conferences. What are your thoughts on this? I've had a lot of people come back and say, my employers discourage me speaking at conferences. But then they have conversations and they explain why it's valuable to everyone involved, and that conversation can change. But it's important to have that conversation, which, as someone who's been at the very bottom rungs of higher ed, can be a little bit uncomfortable at times to have. But don't be afraid to have it and speak up. So listen, Mark and Ed, this has been an amazing conversation. I know we're already a little past 5 because the show started late. Excuse me. I apologize for that, guys. I had a meeting backing up on this. But let's toss it around to both of you guys for what are your final takeaways, tips, thoughts, just in general send-offs on managing your higher ed career. I'm going to start with you, Mark. You're already up on screen. So let me play up. What are your final thoughts and takeaways for folks that are watching this show that clearly are invested in this industry? By the way, hats off to you guys for watching a show like this and investing your extra time and really thinking about this and having these conversations. What's your advice to them on where things are going and what they should be doing, looking at, thinking about, or acting upon?
I think it's important to understand where you want to go in your career and what's the best avenue to get there. And let me just, one of the closing things I'd like to share is that I am on the board of directors of the Higher Ed Web Professionals Association, and one of the mission of our organization is to advance the web profession. And we have recognized that we need to do a better job of providing leadership opportunities. So one of the things we did this last year in Austin is we did a half-day workshop on leadership, and we're going to expand that concept to create a leadership academy to give people who want to become leaders on their campus kind of the skill set, the training they need to really be able to kind of move into that leadership position. Part of this will be understanding higher ed. How do you go to the administration and explain why you don't have enough resources? Really giving people that kind of training. Again, one final comment I have about the social media piece is that think about where you can get formal education on how to do your job. It's hard to find. There's no degree in social media. There's no, real good degree in web development. There's a little bit of college work being done that way right now. To me, going to a conference like High Ed Web is where you get your training. And that's one of the things I think we need to share with our superiors is that's where you go and learn how to do things. On social media is where you learn and go how to do things.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Ed, what are your final thoughts, takeaways? Mark just nailed it, but I think you can always pull a little bit more gold out of your pocket, right? What do you got for us?
No, I mean, I think it's great that, well, first, thanks for the opportunity, Seth. I always enjoy talking with you on your show. Higher Ed Live is awesome, and the community is great, and so thanks for those watching. I think my takeaway would be make sure that you are, in terms of learning and education, don't just get stuck in the associations, the hashtags, the things that you're used to. Be willing to branch out and to learn from what other folks in higher ed are learning and doing, because I know I've learned a lot from different types of chats, different types of associations and conferences I've had the opportunity to go to. And if you can't make those kind of opportunities, create them and find ways of getting that content and having conversations with people. Because if you're going to move up in higher ed, you need to be willing to show people not only the quality of your work, but show that you're willing to move outside of your own silo, your own office, if you will, and branch out and meet other people, because that's how you're going to be seen, that's how you're going to be heard. And it's important to do that work. It's not something that you're going to put on the clock or something you're going to put on your resume, but it's something that when you have a conversation with someone, your experience and that knowledge will come through in a way that is a personal experience, and you just can't put a price tag on that. So those of you who are passionate about higher ed, all of you have the opportunity to do something. And so whatever it is that you're passionate about, make sure that you connect with the folks that can get you there. Find a mentor. I think Mark's a great person to connect with. Seth is as well. And there's so many folks out there in the higher ed community on social media. And Mark's right. Let's connect and help each other out more, because I think you're right. Everyone's very collegial and willing to connect. So good luck to everybody.
And, thank you so much, both Ed and Mark, being on the show. But let me just say this too. Ed, you hit the nail on the head about finding, those mentors and taking charge. I'll be the first to say, and I should publicly, you both are so great. I mean, I've spent time, in person on Skype, and both with Ed and Mark, and they'll both attest. I've asked them a ton of career questions because I deeply both respect their knowledge and where they're at, and they both spend a lot of time giving me great feedback and answers. And it's the kind of thing where realistically, we met on social media. I can ask, Mark, what are your thoughts on speaking on conferences? Ed, what do you think about me getting into this area, that area? people are there and they do want to help. We're in an interesting industry. As frustrating as it can be immensely rewarding. So don't be afraid to ask questions, because again, just even from tonight's two guests have been amazingly supportive of me. My final thoughts on career management and education is that, first up, you obviously understand, we all know this, it's a dance, it's a delicacy. It's about the minor decisions you make every day. It builds to a lot. The other things I want to say is, be honest about your desires. And I'll say this, that transparency is your friend. And people may disagree with this, but when I went into my last job at UCLA, I went in, I sat down with my supervisor, and I said, these are the things I want to learn from this job. Because she said, now granted, this is because I was in a position where she was trying to steal me away from the current position I was in, but I went and said, I want to learn the following things from you. That's what I want out of this job. And she knew right up front, beyond the paycheck, here are the things I was looking for. And she delivered. My boss, Minnie, was amazing. Taught me a lot of skills that I did not have beforehand, made me way stronger than I ever was. But it was also because I asked up front. And if you can put yourself in that position, I think that's a really powerful thing to do. The last things I'm going to say is, fight the good fight. We're talking about transparency. Be transparent with your values. The fights that I lay down, I hope Carla attests to this, although I said this would be dramatic. The fights I lay down in all of my jobs have always been about values. It's about, is this backboning our core mission? Is this about what we're really all about in the end? It's a lot easier to win a fight when you have the mission and you have values on your side, rather than just one opinion swaying to another. If my opinion is a little different than somebody's and it could go either way, those aren't the fights I fight. I fight the fights when I think that this is not what we were built to do. And I'm willing to have that conversation. And at the end of the day, quit your job before you quit your values. I'd rather see you leave this industry and solve the problems that you want to solve and do the things you need to do than stay in it. That said, I think you can do both if you keep hustling, working hard, and having conversations and finding things. But quit your job before you quit your values. So one last time, Ed and Mark, thank you guys both for coming on the show. I really, really appreciate it.
No problem.
Yep,
Thanks.
thank you.
All right, sending off to both you guys, and thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed the show. Obviously, a lot of our shows tend to be a bit more technical. This week, we tried to tackle a bigger subject, and I hope you enjoyed it. I think it's the conversations that need to happen, and we're hoping to have more of them next week. Next week, I have a former congressional staffer coming on, and it's an entire show about the politics of education. You'll hear all about how state funding is getting cut. Mitt Romney has the for-profits in his back pocket. We're having all of the edgy, controversial stuff coming up to you. 2 weeks in a row, we're having a former congressional staffer coming on, politics and education. I hope you guys can tune in for that. It's one I've wanted to tackle for a while. And lastly, use the hashtag, keep the conversation flowing. We'd love to hear more about it. And as always, thank you guys for not only watching Higher Ed Live, but those of you on the East Coast, whether on Central Pacific, wherever you are, thanks for taking some time out of your afternoon to tune in, have a little bit of a conversation, have a little bit of fun. I hope you enjoyed it. And until next time, I'll see you guys over at higheredlive.com. Thanks.